Hey guys, how are we all? Welcome back to the Twist the Bones podcast. It is a new year. I'm finally back. I took a couple weeks off for Christmas and for New Year, but I hope all of you guys, if you celebrate Christmas, had an amazing time. And I also hope you had a great New Year, but I am back. But if you are new here, my name is Megan, and each week I'm going to be sitting down and I read and react to a bunch of spooky, scary, horrifying and weird stories that range from ghosts and the paranormal to the real life encounters with creepy people and potentially dangerous people as well. So before I get into this week's stories, I just want to quickly go over some housekeeping as usual. So firstly, I will always credit the people who wrote these stories, so all of the information will be in the description of each episode if you want to go and support those content creators. And secondly, if you have your own scary story, so whether that be an encounter with a stalker or your own paranormal experience, and if you want it to feature in a future episode, please reach out and send your story over to me. I would absolutely love to read them out on the podcast. And you can do this by either using the Facebook page, which is just Twist the Bones Podcast, or you can email it to twistthebonespod@gmail.com. Again, all that information will be in the description, but let's just get into this week's stories. So this is by Nature Stacy. Again, we're on the Your Ghost Stories website, and this is called 3 Visits to Canyon Deshay. The first time I went to Canyon Deshay, I went to 3 or 4 overlooks on the North Rim. Each and every time I stepped out of my vehicle, I had overwhelming feelings of despair and death. It made me feel horrible, and I didn't know why I was feeling that way. I drove over to the South Rim, and I had feelings of safety and relief at the overlooks. That night, I pitched my tent in the campground with my dog Pillar. I was sitting at the picnic table by a lantern, writing in my journal, when Pillar tugged on my leash, which was wrapped around my wrist, and pulled me towards the car. I called her back and paid her to calm down. She sat beside me again as I journaled, but all of a sudden, she took off and tugged me towards the car again. I told her, yes, I feel the same way. We're sleeping in the car tonight. And I swore never to return there because of how it made me feel. But about 4 years later, I was going on a bird-watching camping trip with a couple of other ladies to Southeast AZ, then on to Teos NM. One of them wanted to go to Canyon Deshay, and I immediately said no. I then thought about facing that fear and offered that we hire a guide to climb into the canyon, camp in the canyon, then climb out the next day. So that's what we did. Our guide and I were sitting by the fire in the canyon when I asked what the history of the canyon was. He said the North Rim is called Canyon de Muerto, and the South Rim is Canyon Deshay. I never realised there were 2 different canyons. He said that Kit Carson and his men massacred the Navajo living in the canyon to the north, and some of those escaped into the canyon to the south. I said, oh, that makes sense. So what is the deal with the campground? And he said that is where Kit Carson's men were buried. Once we climbed out of the canyon, we stayed at the campground, and once again, I could not sleep in my tent. I slept in the car. This story continues, but it gets a lot longer, with weirder things happening. By the way, I'm a seasoned solo tent camper, hiker, paddler, backpacker. If I don't feel right about staying somewhere, I don't. But it's only happened 3 or 4 times. The next year or so, I was on a reservation at a powwow in Oklahoma. My boyfriend and I camped on the reservation. The second night there, while lying in the tent, a native man came to me. He was holding my right hand and pulling me to him while telling me to come with him. I told him I was there with Rob and I would not go. He kept pulling me and telling me to come with him, and I kept pulling away and saying no. I could not get my hand away until I jerked my arm really hard, then wrapped it around Rob, and the native man disappeared. I told Rob what had happened in the morning. He freaked out and said the same thing happened to him the first night we were here, but he didn't want to tell me because it scared him so much. So there was this native woman trying to seduce him with kisses and lure him away from me. Then at one point she looked up at Rob, and she was now a man. A year or 2 later, I travelled solo to Chaco Canyon, then over to Navajo Nation Fair in Window Rock. I was going to camp near Window Rock, but thought that I really needed to get over my reluctance to camp at Canyon Deshay campground. I needed to face my fears and just do it. So I drove up there, arriving just before dusk. I walked to the campground, which I never do, and ran across a lady that was camping solo on her first camping trip ever. I thought how ridiculous it was that I, a seasoned solo traveller, could not sleep in my tent, and this lady could. So I pitched my tent after dark, journaled for a while, then went to sleep. During the night I awoke to the same experience Rob had in Oklahoma. I said out loud, oh please, you can't do better than that. I know what will happen next, referring to the native man trying to seduce me with kisses and telling me to go with him. As soon as I said this, he disappeared. I went back to sleep only to wake sometime in the night to go to the restroom. I never need the restroom in the middle of the night. I put on a dim headlamp and headed for the restroom. I did not turn on the light because I didn't want to wake up tenters in the area. And as soon as I started to urinate, the bathroom door opened and slammed shut. Then immediately, the stall on either side of me slammed shut. I was thinking, there is no way a person could get from the front door to the stalls that fast, and that they could not even see the stalls because there was very little light with my dim headlamp. Then, immediately, there was an unearthly gush of water into either stall beside me. I've heard many women urinate and it does not sound like this. All of this happened very quickly. I was still urinating the whole time, even as I bent over and looked under each stall for feet. But there were no feet. When I finished, I walked over to the sink to wash my hands, then walked over to my tent saying, "Well, you got me there, that was better." No one ever exited the bathroom, and the lights never came on. I did not have a problem sleeping in my tent after this. And that is the end of that one. I'm so sorry, but I had to stop saying the word urinate towards the end. It was in there so many times that I had to sort of edit a couple of those out, because I don't know why I felt weird saying that so many times, but it was just in there quite a lot of times. But yeah, that is the end of that one. I have no idea what that could be. Clearly the place is haunted, or the ghost clearly liked the author of this story, but either way, I'm going to move on to the next one. So this is called Haunted Road, and it's written by Enlightened 1959. My house was located near an old 2-lane highway just outside the city limits of a town named Elizabethton. This area was settled in the late 1760s. Its historical notability is amongst the most fascinating in the entire state. It's home of the first permanent settlement outside the original 13 colonies, so it's bound to have a lot of history. To be more precise in the description of our home, we settled in a small 3-bedroomed home off of a 1-lane road originally made for logging trails. I've also heard these roads called ridge runners, which were built by moonshiners, so I'm not sure what its original purpose for this road was used for. I'd like to add that moonshining is still prevalent in this area today. In addition, this is an old neighbourhood where mostly senior citizens live, so the nights stay very quiet apart from the tree frogs, crickets and a few neighbourhood dogs that bark at raccoons, or other stray animals that dare venture into their domain. We shared only one street lamp down the road, so besides the tranquility of the quiet country life, unless there was a full moon, it was so dark that you could practically cut it with a knife. Up behind us was another 1-lane road with a few old homes, and behind and above that road consists of woods mixed in with some farmland. When we moved to the area back in the mid-90s, we were told some creepy stories that I presumed to be nothing more than old southern folklore. I didn't put much more thought into it, other than just that, until later. We weren't there even a year when we experienced our first paranormal experience. My older daughter came running into my room late one night and told me she'd heard something strange and thought someone was standing outside her bedroom window. She said she was almost asleep when she heard something tapping on her end of the house, and then the window. As I explained earlier, this was an old neighbourhood, so the likelihood of it being some teenage kid messing around was very small. Her bedroom light was off, so we crept over to her window, and after adjusting our eyes to the darkness, we could see something tall, dark, and slender, standing about 7 feet from the window. It appeared to be a man, but then a little too tall and lanky to be a person. We stood there whispering to each other, because we couldn't remember if there was a tree outside her room or not. The moon shed just enough light so that we could see something, but couldn't tell if it was someone or something standing outside her bedroom window. My husband noticed that I wasn't in bed and got up to see where I was. He turned the hall light on. I motioned for him to turn it off. Once he turned it off and we looked back in the spot, it was completely gone. No sign of anything standing there, not even a bush or a small tree. We were both freaked out, and of course my husband just made a joke out of it and summed it up to us girls and our wild imagination. About a year later, we were asked to move out of that house so that the landlord's brother and family could move in, because he'd been out of work for quite some time and could no longer afford to pay rent somewhere else. My parents had bought 5 acres of land about a mile up the road from us. They had a house built on top of the land and hill, and were just waiting for my dad to retire in 6 months. We told them our situation, so they gave me 2 acres of their land to move on. We stayed in their new home while we had a modular home put on the land they gave me. About 6 months after we settled into our new home, one evening I heard something beating on the back door. We ran to the door to find my daughter's boyfriend, who eventually became her husband. I opened the door and he was white as a ghost. I had him come inside, of course, and he stood there, pale as a sheet and shaking. He said as he was driving on our road, right about at the road where he used to turn off to go to our old house, he saw this tall, slender thing with stringy hair and no face. He said it was walking on the same side of the road that he was driving and appeared to be walking towards him at first, but then it looked as if its arms and body were walking one direction, but his head was facing him. He said it didn't have a face, just the head, long black stringy hair facing him, yet the rest of his body was walking and facing the other way. Fast forward about 10 years, I'd been over to my daughter and son-in-law's new house. I took my little Jack Russell. I was driving my Honda Element and had my dog Milo in his cage just behind me. We were on our way back to our house, on the same road. I was on the phone talking to my younger daughter, telling her that we were almost home, when about a half a mile from the old road cut off, Something that looked like what a werewolf would look like, if there was such a thing, ran right out in front of me on its hind legs. The only thing was, he was somewhat transparent, but just slightly. I was able to see every detail. It was like something you could see in an old sci-fi movie, and it looked right at me. I screamed and knew there was no way of missing it. I braced myself for impact. My dog went crazy and my daughter was yelling at me thinking I was in an accident. Whatever it was, went right through my car. I made my daughter come outside and meet me while I got Milo out the car and into the house, and to this day I will not drive down that road at night. I don't know if any of these things are related, but I do know there is something about that road and area that really creeps me out, and I hate even going to that area in the daytime. And that is the end of that one. See, the first sort of, thing they were seeing, it gave me Slender Man vibes. I know it's not supposed to be a real thing, but it really did. I am terrified of looking out of a window at night when it's black, pitch black outside, and just seeing someone or something out there. Oh, the thought just scares the life out of me. But the second one's really interesting. A werewolf sort of creature stood on its hind legs, but either way, that's not a road that I want to be going down. But they were the two stories that I wanted to read out this week, so thank you so much for listening. You guys are going to have to let me know what you thought about those ones. You can do this by heading over to my YouTube channel, you can leave a comment there, or you can go over to the Facebook page and leave your thoughts. And just before I go, like I mentioned, feel free to drop me your stories on that email address. I'd be absolutely honoured to read them out. If you do send me one over, just give a little short title or description in the subject, that would be absolutely amazing. But in the meantime, if you want to head on over to my Instagram, it's just at AlienQueenMeg if you want to keep up with me and all that jazz. But apart from that, I will catch you in my next one. Stay spooky, guys!